Greetings. Once more, you're welcome to my YouTube class. In today's class, we're going to be talking about the tissue. And of course, the word tissue is very popular to an average biology student. In my previous class, we x-rayed the cells and its content. And when I say its content, of course, referring to the different organelles that are found within a cell. Although different cells have similar organelles, it is also important we understand that there are usually variations when it comes to their form, their structure, and their content. And that is to say that the structural characteristics of a particular cell are closely correlated with its function. This is to say that structure determines function. So the structure of a particular cell will determine its function. The structure of a group of cells will determine their function. Even when it comes to protein, the structure of a protein will determine its function and its interaction with other molecules within the cell. Now, when it comes to tissue, you discover that different cells or cells found in different organisms may be different, but it is also important that you understand that cells found within the same species or within the same organism may also be different. For instance, the egg cell and the sperm cell are different both in structure and in function. What am I trying to arrive at? I'm trying to arrive at the fact that the group of cells with common origin, with common structure, and common function are called tissue. That is what tissue is. When you see a group of cells that have common origin, and they have common structure, and they have common function, then you can use one word to represent this group of cells, and that one word is tissue. Having said this, it is important we understand that we have about four different types of tissues. The first one is called the epithelial tissue. The second one is called connective tissue. Third one is called the muscular tissue. Fourth one is called the nervous tissue. So these are the four different types of tissues. The first one called epithelial tissue, of course, is derived from the three germ layers, the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. The endoderm, ectoderm, and mesoderm. That is where these this epithelial tissue is derived from. And all the cells that are derived from these three germ layers, because they have common origin and common structure, will now fall under this type of tissue that is called epithelial tissue. Remember, I defined tissue by saying that the cells that form a particular tissue must have common origin, their common structure, and of course, similar function. So the second one is the connective tissue, which we are still going to discuss. This one is derived from the mesoderm. They'll have the muscular tissue, which is also derived from the mesoderm. Then we'll have the nervous tissue derived from the ectoderm. For the interest of viewers, it is important to let you know that for today's class, we're going to be talking about the epithelial tissue. Probably in subsequent classes, we'll look at the connective, the muscular, and the nervous tissue. So for epithelial tissue are the group of tissue that contains cells that form what we call a coherent cell sheets. They form coherent cell sheet that covers the inner and the external parts of the body. The inner part of the body some of the visceral structures in the body, like the liver, the heart, and the intestine. All these structures are covered by tissue. And the type of tissue that covers them is the epithelial tissue. And that is why we said the internal and the external part of the body. So the internal part of the body is covered the way the external part of the body is covered. Like the skin is what covers the external part of the body. So the skin is part of the epithelial tissue. That means that the primary function of epithelial tissue is protection. It protects the internal part of the body and the external part of the body. Having said this, it is now important to look at some of the basic features of the epithelial tissue. And I've said it. One is protection. Hmm? It forms continuous layer of cells. Continuous layer. Why is it important to form continuous layer of cell? Assuming we have this as a layer of cell, and we have another one. This is another cell. This is a cell. This is a cell. Then there's a space here. Because of this space, it may not, confer the normal protection it should confer. So as a result of this, or because of this, you discover that the cells that form epithelial tissue are not like this. They form continuous layer of cells. That means the cells are usually attached together by what we call intercellular cement, or yes, intercellular cement, or the ground substance. It helps to bind the cells together to form a continuous cell sheet, which now does the function of protecting the inner and external part of the body. It is also important to know that these cells that form the epithelial tissue are exposed to physical injury. And because they're exposed to physical injury, they're also exposed to being damaged. But when they are damaged, they usually grow back or usually replaced by the type of cell division we call the mitotic cell division. So with the mitotic cell division, they a kind of they are regenerated, or a kind of replace. I mean, the new cells grow to replace the damaged one. So these are the basic features. Now we'll go into the classification of epithelial tissue. Epithelial tissue can be classified into two different groups. We'll have the one we call the covering epithelia, the covering epithelia. Then we'll have the glandular epithelia. The covering epithelia will have the glandular epithelia. When we talk about the covering epithelia, the primary function of the covering epithelia is cell protection, to protect the 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 internal and external part of the body. Under this covering epithelia, we will now look at kind of I mean, sorry, this is not classification. These are types. We have types of epithelial tissue. We have the covering and glandular. So covering epithelia and glandular epithelia are types of epithelial tissue. So now let's now talk about the classification of covering epithelia. So covering epithelia can be classified into two different groups again. We have arrangement or classification based on the arrangement of the constituent cells, and classification based on arrangement of no, we have the two different classification. We have classification that is based on the arrangement of the constituent cells, and we also have classification based on the shape of the constituent cells, based on the arrangement of the constituent cells and based on the shape of the constituent cells. So we're going to be picking them one after the other. So coming to the arrangement based on the coming to classification based on the arrangement of constituent cells, we have three different types of epithelia. Epithelia. The first one, is called the simple epithelia. We'll have pseudo stratified. They'll have stratified. So these are the different types of epithelia based on the arrangement of constituent cells. The first one is simple epithelia. In this case, this group of epithelia have a single layer of cells. They have just a single layer of cells. And this single layer of cells all rest on a basement membrane. This is called the basement membrane. Basement membrane. Basement membrane. So they all rest on this basement, just having a single layer of cells. You see this kind of epithelial cells or epithelial tissue within the lining of the blood vessels. Then the second one is pseudostratified epithelia. Pseudostratified epithelia. As the name implies, pseudo is that word pseudo means false. So in essence, it looks like it looks like epithelial tissue or epithelial cells that are more than one cell thick, that are multi-layered, but in essence, it is still a single layer of cell. Because if you look at it, it looks this way. They also have cells resting on the same basement membrane. But if you are not careful, you may think it is multi-layered, but it is not multi-layered. All there, it also has single cells, just like simple epithelia, which rests on the same basement membrane. You see this kind of epithelial tissue within the trachea, and probably the respiratory tract. Then the third one is the stratified epithelia. This kind of epithelia is usually tough and impervious, very, very tough in terms of structure. It's strong. You see this kind of epithelium, and of course, it's multi-layered. It has multi-layered cells. This kind of epithelium has multi-layered cells, and even though all the cells also rest on a similar basement membrane, they also rest on similar basement membrane, but it has multi-layered cells. This kind of epithelia is found in the skin. You can see how tough the skin is. And also in the vagina, you can also see how strong the vagina is. So that is where you see the stratified epithelia is very stratified. That means it's strong and impervious. So we are done with the classification based on arrangement of constituent cells. We'll now talk about classification based on the shape of constituent cells. Based on the shape of constituent cells. And based on the shape of constituent cells, we'll have another four types of epithelia. We'll have the squamous epithelia. We'll have the cuboidal epithelia. We'll have the columnar. We'll have transitional epithelia. Transitional. So talking about the first one, squamous, you discover that the cells of the squamous epithelia are usually flattened. And apart from the fact that they are flattened, they look like paving stone when viewed from the surface. They look like paving stone when viewed from the surface. They look like paving stone. So if you're looking at it from the surface, it looks like a kind of paving stone. So the location of this type of tissue, or where you can find this type of tissue, is usually in the part of the body that is selectively permeable. That means that it's a kind of controls the exit and the entrance of molecules. So you see this within the alveoli of the lungs that helps in controlling the exit and the entrance of molecules. So carbon dioxide diffuses out while oxygen diffuses in. So that is where you see the squamous epithelial tissue. But don't forget that it looks like paving stone when viewed from the surface. Then we'll have the cuboidal epithelial tissue. The cuboidal epithelial tissue. So when it comes to cuboidal epithelial tissue, discover that this is the kind of epithelial tissue that that are isodiametric. 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 What does it mean to be isodiametric? It means that they are as wide as they are tall. If they are cuboidal, let me just use that word. They are cuboidal, They are cuboidal in shape, just like uh, a cube. That means that their length is the same thing as their width. That is a basic thing you should know about this type of epithelial tissue. Then the next one is columnar epithelia. In the case of columnar epithelia, we discover that the cells are longer than their short. Or let me say that their 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 length is usually uh, higher than their width. They are longer than their short. How do I want to put it now? So if you look at this shape now, you see that they are higher in terms of length. The length is higher than the width. That is just the summary of it. The length, the length is greater or higher than the width. That is what you can use to remember the columnar epithelial tissue. The columnar epithelial tissue. Then the last one is the transitional epithelium. This is a type of epithelium that sustains the ability to be stretched and possibly return back to its normal position. For instance, if you look at the bladder, when the bladder has urine, it could be stretched, and when the urine is out, then it returns back to the normal position. So the uterus or the womb is also like that. When there is a baby, it is stretched, and when the baby is out, it returns back to its normal position. So that is the uh, that is where you see transitional epithelial tissue. Then the last type of epithelial tissue is the glandular epithelial tissue. Of course, they contain glandular epithelial cells that collectively form what is called a gland. And of course, we have two different types of this gland, the exocrine gland, the endocrine gland. The exocrine gland secretes its products such as mucus, tears, and gastric juice with the help of a duct. That means it contains a duct. The substance it secretes is through the instrumentality of a duct. But the endocrine gland, which secretes hormone, does that directly into the blood. So it is ductless. So the exocrine gland has duct, whereas the endocrine gland is ductless. So this is how far we can go in talking about epithelial tissue. In subsequent classes, I'll talk about the connective tissue, the muscular tissue, and the nervous tissue. See you in my next class.